Well, good morning again, everyone. Welcome here to this opportunity of a Creation Care conversation. My name is Nathan. I am one of the pastors here at Park Hill. I use the pronouns he, him, and his, and we are delighted to have all of you here with us. As we've shared throughout the year, we have 5 different areas of focus in the life of our church when it comes to social justice and to mission. Those include racial reconciliation, immigration, LGBTQIA inclusion, care for our creation, and alleviating poverty that is around us. We were thinking we might do this conversation, Heidi, in April when it was Earth Month or Earth Day, but we're just a couple of days after April and still want to take some time to learn a little more about Earth Justice, hear a little more of your story, hear how Park Hillers that are watching will have the opportunity maybe to get involved and how they might be able to help or advocate for creation and some of the issues that you're working with as well. So Park Hillers, let me tell you a little bit about Earth Justice, and then Heidi will fill us in a little more and tell us a little bit of her story as well. So from the website, Earth Justice is the premier nonprofit public interest environmental law organization. And it says, they wield the power of law and the strength of partnership to protect people's health, to preserve magnificent places and wildlife, and to advance clean energy and to combat climate change. And I saw on the website, if you dig a little bit deeper, there's some core values of justice, of partnership, inclusion, and of excellence. And we'll probably talk a little more about those, or sound like some of the things that we value here too at Park Hill United Methodist Church. So this is Heidi McIntosh, Park Hillers. Heidi is a managing attorney, I believe, here for the Rocky Mountain region of Earth Justice, and welcome to Park Hill. Glad to have you with us, Heidi.
Thank you. It's a real gift to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you first tell us just a little bit more about yourself? How'd you get involved in this work? How'd you end up at Earth Justice? What is it that you do with Earth Justice?
Okay. This is really a lifelong journey for me. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, in a family that really valued the outdoors. We spent a lot of time outdoors, camping, exploring, from Mexico all the way through the American West. And I really, I found peace. I found myself in the outdoors. I found meaning in the outdoors. It's where our family came together and shared each other. And it was a place for conversation and reflection and growth. And I was fortunate to be able to make protecting those places and those values a part of my professional life. There was a time when I worked for a large firm in Los Angeles right after law school, not doing those things, and I was struck by that need I had, the absence of that integration of my personal values and my professional life. So I've been doing this work for nonprofit organizations for about almost 30 years now, and it's just been a wonderful way to live my life, to live my values Monday through Friday, as well as Saturday and Sunday too, right?
Sunday, right?
So after working in Los Angeles, I moved to Salt Lake City because the University of Utah had a Master's of Law program there that focused on just environmental law. So it was an opportunity for me to really retool my skills and rededicate my profession to the environment and the things that were important to me. And while I was there, I went there expecting to be there for a year or so while I did the program. I fell into working with a group called the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, and I just loved it. It was a wonderful job where I had a lot of independence. Utah has these fabulous landscapes that I'm sure many of us are familiar with, the canyon country, the national monuments, and the wildlife and the ecosystems that were there just really inspired me. And so I was there for about 20 years, working oftentimes in partnership with Earth Justice. And so when the managing attorney position came open here, I made the leap. And one of the reasons that I really found a home here is because of the earth and the justice, those two values that are really front and center at Earth Justice. And it really allowed me to bring in those elements of social justice, of environmental justice and the opportunity to work towards alleviating some of those injustices as well. And so there were just a lot of things that drew me to Earth Justice. And my husband is from Denver. He grew up here, so it was a homecoming for him, and it's a home for me now, too.
Absolutely, very good.
So that's my journey.
Yeah, okay. So tell us, maybe big picture, tell us a little bit more about Earth Justice. What does the firm do? We'll get into some projects and cases in a moment, but just generally, what's Earth Justice about?
Okay. Well, with 160 lawyers, we've really got a lot of ground covered. So we have attorneys in the organization who work with low-income communities who've been the subject of environmental injustice for so long, and have suffered health consequences as a result. And again, it's all kind of tied into poverty and the environment, creation care and people. It's all so intertwined. We have people who work in our Washington office who lobby Congress on a range of environmental related issues. We work with tribes to help them protect the health and well-being of their communities in the face of things like massive mine proposals that would not only threaten their health, but also threaten sacred spaces. For example, we represent tribes in Arizona now whose ancestors were there 10,000 years ago and who are buried there. This is an incredibly sacred place for them, yet there's a company that is seeking to build a gigantic copper mine there. We represent farm workers. We represent conservation groups who are trying to protect some of the magnificent places that we have throughout the West and everywhere. I mean, we have offices in Alaska and Hawaii and Florida, and so we really cover a lot of ground. Just about every environmental issue, including environmental justice issues you can think of, there's probably somebody at Earth Justice doing that work.
Okay, fantastic.
And we do it for free. We don't charge our clients anything. So we're.
You should say that again.
We do it for free.
Because folks are like, why is
right.
Heidi here? What's the angle?
No. We do it for free.
That's
we
right.
don't charge them a penny. So people who wouldn't normally have access to lawyers or to the court system can do that in partnership with us. And we really value those partnerships, and we learn a lot from our partners who are working on the ground closest to the threats that they're experiencing. So it's really fortunate that we're able to do that. I never have to tell a client, I'm sorry, we can't take your case because you don't have the funding for it. We're funded instead through foundations and donors who make the work possible.
Absolutely. That's fantastic to hear. So I should tell you, Park Hillers, that Heidi and I are going to talk a little more, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. And so if you have the ability on YouTube to put in your questions in the chat, we encourage you to do that, or down in the comment section. If you are watching with us and joined us today on Facebook, you can put your questions on Facebook. Pastor Laura is there watching, and we'll make sure that we get those questions. If you happen to have my cell phone, it's sitting beside me. And if you want to text me a question when we get there, you can feel free to do that as well. We do have some weather that is moving into the Denver metro area, and so if we're impacted by that at all, you'll know it with the technology, but hopefully that won't happen today. So Heidi, tell us a little bit then, maybe I didn't frame it this way as we were chatting earlier, but tell us maybe about a case or two that you're really proud of that you've worked on in the past, something that you would love to kind of puff your chest out a little bit and say, we were able to do this.
Yeah. Well, most recently, I guess I'd refer back to the case that I mentioned briefly with the tribes in Arizona. Yeah. So these are 3 tribes that we represent, the Tohono O'odham Nation, the Pasquayaqui tribe, and the Hopi tribe. And they have these ancestral ties to this place in the Santa Rita Mountains, south of Tucson, Arizona, where their ancestors have lived, like I said, for 10,000 years. And they weren't aware when this mine proposal first got underway more than 10 years ago that we were available. And so they were working their way through the process, and ultimately the Forest Service granted a permit for this mine. And the mining law in this country is outdated. We're still using a law that was passed in 1872. in the days of the gold rush. It was meant to get miners out to the west, to settle the west and to mine the resources. But fast forward over 100 years later, you have these multinational corporations who can dig a pit a mile wide and a mile deep. And the 1872 mining law was never designed for something like that, but it gives mining companies a lot of rights on public lands. So, for example, they were for a long time, until it was stopped 10 years ago or so, mining companies or any mining claimant was able to purchase federal public property for as little as $2.50 an acre, and then they would own that property outright. That's no longer the case, but still mining companies have a lot of rights, and so they can mine. In this case, the mining company needed to figure out what they were going to do with their 2 billion tons of mine waste and tailings, because they couldn't fit it on the site where they owned the land. So they wanted to put it on land where these tribes' ancestors were buried, where people still go to this day to pray and to gather medicinal herbs and basket-making materials, which provide a lot of income to the tribes. So we took that case to court. A couple of years ago, we won and established some precedent that dialed back some of the discretion that the Forest Service believed, that the mining company had argued that the Forest Service had, lacked. And in the end, the court ruled that the mining company couldn't put that waste on these sacred lands. Of course, they appealed, and we just had an oral argument before the Ninth Circuit in February, so we'll see how that goes. But that was a big case, and I was just so honored to work with the tribes and pleased that we could do something to save these sacred lands. You know, some of the other work that we're doing in the environmental justice program area has to do with the North Denver neighborhoods, Globeville, Swansea, Elyria, where the communities there live in the shadow of the Suncor refinery, which has a history of polluting the air and the water in the neighborhood, leading to sky-high asthma rates, higher rates of cancer, diabetes in the community, all linked to Suncor and all of the other impacts in that neighborhood, the I-70 expansion, the pet food factory, other industrial activities that are going on in that neighborhood. And so the most recent thing is that we are working with them to go through the Suncor air quality permit, which is under review right now. In fact, if people want to go on the Colorado Air Quality Control Division website, there'll be a hearing tomorrow where people can log on and testify about their concerns about the Suncor refinery. So now is a great opportunity to get engaged in one of the community's biggest issues, confronting one of the metro area's largest polluters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I told you we were just going to talk. We wouldn't look at the camera very much, but the camera was looking at us. But would you give that information again to the folks watching if they want to get involved or be able to speak tomorrow, where they would go and what they could do?
Okay. So if you go on the Air Quality Control Division website, it's the state of Colorado. It's not a federal agency, it's a state agency, a part of the Colorado Department of Public Health. You'll see information about a public hearing tomorrow on Monday in which the AQ, the Air Quality Control Division, will hear public comments and concerns about the Suncor refinery air quality permit.
Absolutely. And so I've said a couple of times, we got started. I mentioned it earlier. You were with us for worship today, which was great. Thanks for joining us earlier today as well. We have a focus of racial reconciliation, LGBTQIA inclusion, immigration rights, alleviating poverty and creation care. And you've mentioned a couple of times around environmental justice. We sometimes call it intersectionality. I think with Suncor and the neighborhoods that it's in, largely a community of color, how do you see all of these different things intersecting? If somebody were to say, I don't see how they connect. How might you help connect some of those dots for us?
The environmental community and the environmental movement has really started to focus, and rightly so, a lot more on issues around poverty and structural racism and justice. And you can't really separate those things, right? What we see in too many communities, including Denver, is that there are people living in communities that are facing environmental threats, air toxins, pollutants in the water in neighborhoods that were redlined in the 20s and 30s. And you can go online today and even see some of the original documents where federal surveyors were writing about these neighborhoods and their racial makeup. And if they were not white neighborhoods, they were very blatant about the risks that banks would be facing by lending to people in these neighborhoods. And you can see where the red lines were drawn in the 20s and 30s, and they correspond exactly to the low-income, non-white communities in Denver today, and that's where the environmental risks are. And so it's just critical if we care about, as we should, removing structural racism and lifting up people who have been disadvantaged for too long, then we need to think about what we can do to improve the lives of people who are living, for example, in North Denver or elsewhere throughout the city and throughout the state, where we just need to right those wrongs so people can live safely, where their kids aren't going to the hospital with asthma attacks, where they can sleep at night, leave the windows open. Yeah, those are just issues of fundamental fairness and justice that I think are just inextricably wound up in environmental concerns and ideas around creation, care.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. That hopefully will give some hope or comfort to those of us that were in charge or responsible for listing the different areas or determining the different areas that we might focus, because we struggle, right, because of the intersectionality of all the different things that we might be involved in. And folks have such a heart that we really want to say, we want to do it all, but we know that we can't do it all. Maybe that's a question, how do you determine which cases to take on, which projects to work on? Is there a strategy behind that? How do you know how to do that?
Yeah, so that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
And we try to cover the 3 program areas.
Yeah, share a
that
little
we're
more. You
trying to-
shared about that, I think, in early service, or in service, rather. Tell us again those 3 areas of focus that Earth Justice has, and then if you'll continue, carry on with how you determine where to focus. Yeah.
Right. And so they're all intertwined, of course, right? But one of the areas is sort of care for the natural world. Public lands and wildlife is the term that we use for it, and water. And then the second one is healthy communities, environmental justice. And then the third one is climate and energy. And the way they intersect, for example, is that if you drive along I-70 through the city, that's where the North Denver communities are that I have been talking about. Well, as you're driving along in your fossil-fueled vehicle, of course, everybody is emitting pollutants in that neighborhood where they're concentrating there. And so we have been working with the Public Utilities Commission, trying to elevate the voices of people in those communities who are saying, let's make that transition to as many electric vehicles as we can, as soon as possible, so we won't be bearing the brunt of all of the exhaust that comes out of the cars traveling on I-70. And transportation is now the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the state. It's something we really need to get a hold of. And not just because that exhaust is contributing to a change in the climate, but because immediately they're impacting the people who are living right there. So that's the intersection, for example, on environmental justice and clean energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm sure you get all types of people or communities or others that are wanting you to take on cases. So they have to fit within those 3 focus areas, but I'm sure that you get more than that lots of cases fit in that. And so how do you
Right.
kind of whittle that down? I would imagine there's some of that's like, well, what's actually doable and winnable and that type of thing, but what else goes into that
Well,
decision?
it's a huge challenge,
Yeah.
sort of like the challenge that you were describing for yourself. So what we try to do, and we have 11 attorneys with support staff, so our hours are finite.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's for sure. We try to really go deep with our partners and be there for them with whatever opportunities might arise or whatever threats arise. And so, for example, we started working with the North Denver communities on the I-70 expansion. And then we were working with them on Suncor, and then we worked with them on electric vehicles, and we will be there for them because we have that relationship with them, and we'd like to understand deeply their issues. So, so we've made a commitment to that work. I know that there are many other communities in Colorado and in our region, which includes the Four Corner states and beyond, that are suffering from environmental threats that need help. And it's hard, but we're not going to be able to address every
Everything,
threat.
absolutely.
We have to use the hours that we have with the relationships that we have, and then looking beyond to see if there are cases we can bring that really have a large precedential effect. So if we win this case, it'll create new law that will help everybody, whether
Okay.
they were a plaintiff in that case or not. That's something that we look at. We look for big threats and opportunities to make the transition. So, for example, moving over time from fossil fuel development to clean energy, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a tough choice.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
lot of balancing.
Yeah.
And we try to get it right
Yeah,
and try to do as much as we can.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are, I think, that question and those decision making, I think, are not unique, obviously, to the work that you all do with Earth Justice, right? We have to have those conversations here in the life of the church with our finite time and resources that we have as staff or as pastors, but also with our lay folks. But yeah, we're all making what's the largest impact we can have. I love the idea of, what precedent can we make at a big level, then we'll have an impact on other folks that you might never meet or get to be a part of their life or take their case on, but still have that impact for them to say, here's what's happened in the past, here's what's decided. That's fantastic, absolutely. So in the life of the church, as Christians, we're here at Park Hill, we're in the midst, as you heard this morning, of a worship series on the book of Revelation. And the last couple of weeks, we've had these passages of scripture that talk about all of creation. And I take that, pretty literal in that sense of this idea that all of the different parts of creation, somehow, some way, I don't know how the trees or rivers or what it might be, or the animals, but the different walks of life with humanity, but that all of creation will somehow be there, present in whatever this future is that God is making happen with us. And so to me, and I think this goes all the way back to the book of Genesis at
Yes.
the beginning with creation, where the stories are, there's humanity and put in a garden and to care for it. We sometimes read that as dominion and think that means that we get to do whatever we want with. There are other translations that say that we're responsible, that we were put in that garden to be responsible, be put here on earth. I'll stop preaching to you and get to my question. But so generally, if God cares about something, we would say we need to care about it. Where are there experiences in your own life, religious-wise or otherwise, that really draw and help you? I talked about in the sermon, right? Get up. Who do you get up for? Why do you go to the office, or whether it's remotely or in person, right? Why do you do that work? What drives you to that?
Yeah. Well, getting back to your comment about what we can learn from the Bible, I mean, you open the Bible on the first page, the first verse is about God creating the heaven and the earth,
right.
and then the verses that follow talk about the whales and the birds and the beasts that God created, and he saw those and saw that they were good.
Yeah.
So,
That's right.
yeah. I take that seriously. I mean, I think when I look at, for example, I'm a birder, lifelong birder,
Okay.
and I think about things like the hummingbirds that we see here in our backyards, 2 or 3 inches long. Well, they might have spent the winter in Central America or even further south. And they make this trip every year, somehow understanding where to go.
It's amazing.
Yes. And I'm about to do a bird banding thing next week for Mother's Day, and sometimes, this is the Audubon Society that does this, they'll find a bird, they'll catch it in a mist net, and it will have a band from a previous visit to the exact same spot. A little yellow warbler. And they're birds that travel from Alaska all the way to New Zealand on a migration that takes 10 days nonstop over the ocean. Those things are miracles.
Amen. Preach. Right, yes.
Just astounding. And those are just a few examples, right, of the incredible things we see in the natural world. So really, who are we to say, well, we can live without this species? I mean, we're having an enormous biodiversity crisis right now. In my lifetime, I'm getting older all the time, but it's not that long. In my lifetime, we've lost about 1/3 of the birds.
Say that again, because that's heartbreaking. I mean, that's just, I oftentimes describe things as ridiculous, and I use that word in a positive sense, like, whoa, that's really ridiculous, especially talking about creation, some of the miracles that you're talking about, but using it in a negative, so that's ridiculous. 1/3. A third of the bird population is gone. And in my lifetime, I know that I am seeing fewer birds, and I'm seeing different birds. I'm not seeing the birds that I used to see. My dad still lives in the same house I grew up in Tucson. And as long as I can remember, he's been feeding the birds, and there would be an incredible diversity of birds right in the backyard, from cardinals and roadrunners to phenopeplas and pyraloxias and all these incredible birds. And he doesn't see that diversity anymore. And at the same time, we're seeing different birds in the yard that we would never see before, or in the park down the street. So things have changed in a very short period of time, and it's not. It doesn't feel right for us to have such an enormous impact on creation that it shouldn't be up to us to say that that certain species are going to live and some species are not going to live. Because of the way that we want to live our lives, the way that we want to drive as much as we want to drive. I think that there are a lot of things that we can do to moderate our impact on the planet, the natural world, and on our neighbors who don't have as much, and create, I think, a significant impact. I think that we can make things much better, reduce our footprint without, I think there are changes we can make. Yeah,
we can
do better.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
to make things better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So talk, kind of harkening back even to that we can do better, that we can get involved. You mentioned the opportunity tomorrow. Clearly, you all can't take on every case. What would you say to park killers? How can we help support both the work of Earth Justice? I know there'd be a long list, and we can Google. I don't expect you to give us that type of answer, but just how can we help to support Earth Justice and the work that you all are doing? And are there easy things that you might tell us right now that we could do to make it better, to do better, to make things better?
Okay. So of course you can donate to Earth Justice or any other organization who's doing the kind of work that really resonates with you. And I didn't come here necessarily to ask for money because I think there are more important things, but that's something that people can sometimes find the capacity to do.
Right.
And
that's
possible.
earthjustice.org, right?
Yes.
Earthjustice.org. Okay.
Yes. And then there are lots of environmental justice organizations. There's Green Latinos, there's Colorado Latino Forum. There are a number of them that are easy to find. Drive less. Look for opportunities to reduce your use of fossil fuels. I mean, climate change is such an environmental and moral imperative right now. Every one of us needs to do something to find those habits that we might have that we can change. If you need a new car, consider an electric car. There are fabulous options on the market, and mainstream corporations like GM are announcing that they're not going to sell gas-fueled cars anymore. I think it's after 2030, something like that.
Yeah,
so
sure.
on the foreseeable horizon.
Absolutely.
So change is coming. I think there are ways that that we can moderate our behavior, moderate our buying habits, to, like I said, just continually reduce our impact on the planet. Join with your neighbors. Look for opportunities to do things like attend the Suncor hearing tomorrow. It'll be via Zoom, of course. But there may be other opportunities that speak to you as well, whether that's the agencies that regulate wildlife, for example, oil and gas development. Both the Air Quality Control Division and the Oil and Gas Commission have been having a series of rulemakings for about the past year or so that would better regulate the production of methane gas and fossil fuels. There's a bill in the House, in the legislature right now that would actually make the greenhouse gas roadmap that the governor released in 2019 with targets that would have us reduce greenhouse gases 50% by 2030 and then 90% by 2050. Those limits would become law, have the force of law. They would be enforceable. So if people are interested in getting involved in that, they can call the governor's office, support the legislators who are behind that bill. There's just really a myriad of things, and I think it's a matter of finding what resonates with you, thinking about what your capacity is to contribute, and then looking for those opportunities to get involved. Because those public hearings, when you attend, it makes a difference.
Sure.
When you speak your truth about something that's happening that concerns you, and the more voices that the regulators and the politicians hear, the better.
Absolutely. Yes, use the voice that God has given you. Absolutely. So, Cindy, we're going to start some questions, if that's okay. We've
Sure.
got a few here. Cindy has asked several questions. You've answered a couple of them already. She wanted to know about some personal choices, some things, ways that folks could get involved. She wants to know what can we purchase or not purchase to preserve our environment. You talked a little bit about vehicles and buying electric vehicles. Are there other major type of things, or maybe even simple types of things that we would either purchase or not purchase or partake in that would consider to help, or continue to help, rather?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So anytime you can support the renewable energy movement in Colorado, you ought to think about it. And that includes electric cars, where there are really attractive federal and state tax rebates for getting a car. And sometimes the dealerships also have really great incentives too, so that brings down that cost of an electric vehicle. Solar panels on your roof. If you happen to own a home, that's a great option. Xcel is offering some incentives for people to put solar on their roofs in a way that you can feed that energy back to the grid, reduce the need for fossil fuel generated energy. In a state like Colorado where it's so sunny, if you can do it, that's great. Or you could also check the box. I think it's on the Xcel bill. We happen to have solar, so I don't see that box. But you can buy into community solar gardens, and you can choose to purchase your energy from wind-generated sources. as opposed to natural gas or coal-generated sources, and coal is really exiting the market. So the choices that are emerging now are between renewables and gas more. So I would say go for the renewables when you buy appliances for your home. Choose the energy-efficient appliances. And, you know, as I say this, a lot of these things are things that people can do when they own a home and they're thinking about, you know, upgrading, buying a different kind of, you know, the kinds of things that people buy when they own a home. But there ought to be more options for people who don't own homes but are living in rentals, living in apartments, where we need more charging facilities. And need, you know, more opportunities for people to be able to buy into solar, even if they're not in a position to put a solar panel on their roof. And, you know, think about things like flying. I mean, everybody flies. I fly. But I've started to think twice about whether a particular flight is something that I need to do. So these are all little things, but that collectively can have a big impact if we change our culture, the way we think about what we need and maybe don't need, and just like I said, you know, overall try to have a lighter footprint.
Yeah, absolutely. I just got a couple more questions. You've talked a little bit about Suncor and how to have a voice on that tomorrow. This is a word, glyphosate, am I saying that right? So she said, I tried to talk to my company out of using glyphosate in Monsanto's, weed-killing product Roundup. Okay.
Right.
All right, so we're on the same page at least. So thanks for bearing with me. She said that she tried to find an alternative to be able to offer her company, but wasn't able to find a good one. Do you have any resources you might be able to guide her to or others to?
Not off the top of my head. Okay. I can try to find out, though, and get that information to you.
Okay, that'd be great. And then I know that your friend Carol High.
Yes, hi, Carol.
Is watching and has a question for you. That's our connection today. Thank you, Carol, for making that connection for us all. She says, are you defending the public lands such as Bears Ears and areas around the Grand Canyon?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you tell us a little more about that for those of us that are
Sure. So there are two national monuments well, there are more than two, but there are two at issue here that have been in the news a lot. One is the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, and one is the Bears Ears National Monument. I think Bears Ears has probably gotten a little more news, but it was a monument that President Obama created at the end of his term after consulting with 5 tribes from the area who came together and asked President Obama to protect these marvelous landscapes and canyon complexes in southeastern Utah, because it really is sort of the area with the richest archaeological resources and cultural importance. They're sacred to the tribes, yet they had been threatened by off-road vehicle use and rampant looting, and oil and gas interests have been attempting to lease lands there as well. So President Obama created the monument. It's about 1.6 million acres. And then President Trump came into office, and he slashed that monument by 85%. I mean, really just revoked it. The other monument is the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, which President Clinton established in 1996, so a much older monument. That was about 1.8 million acres. And President Trump slashed that by about half, intentionally leaving a coal deposit there because he was hoping that a company would come in and develop a coal mine there. And these are both places of remarkable beauty, incredible biological diversity, amazing geologic formations. In the Grand Staircase Escalante, there are fossils there that can be found nowhere else in the world. And because it's been protected since 1996, our paleontologists have been able to get grants to study the area, and they've been digging up just an unbelievable number of these, like I said, these brand new fossils that they had never seen before. It's just been incredible. So shortly after President Trump rolled back those two monuments, I, on behalf of 10 other conservation groups and in partnership with the Natural Resources Defense Council and my former employer, the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, we went to court in DC and have been battling that rollback ever since. As soon as President Biden took office, he initiated a review of those rollbacks, which is ongoing right now. And the forecasts, the predictions are that President Biden will restore those monuments. But those are such incredibly unique and important and special places. And Bears Ears, also Grand Staircase, but Bears Ears with the cultural ties to the tribes whose ancestors have been there forever, and still, they have such an important and significant and profound connection to those lands.
Absolutely.
Those places should be protected, and I think they will be again.
Great. Thank you for doing that. Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about solar. There's a question that says, do you have any advice? You've given us some already. We too have solar. We got that installed about a year ago. Happy to have that.
That's great.
Do our small part. But do you have any advice for homeowners who are considering a switch to solar? And then how about it says the pastors and our board of trustees, the folks that are in charge of the building. Every now and then folks will talk about trying to do solar here in the life of the church. No idea what that looks like, but what advice might you offer to homeowners and to institutions that have big buildings like we do?
Okay. Well, we got solar on our house some years ago, and speaking from our experience, it was pretty easy to do. The solar companies, a couple of them I think we talked to, came out to the house, looked at the roof, gave us an estimate, came out, put the panels on, and all of a sudden our meter's spinning backwards. And they have some good financing options. You can lease them, you can buy them with a payment plan over time. Those are both options, but over time, the savings that you accrue on your electric bill kind of even things out. It turned out to be a really good deal for us. And I think too, as people do it, your neighbors start asking you about it. And I think it's going to grow. And now when you see a lot of new houses, they already come with solar on their roof. So I think that's really going to be a wave of the future. And looking more broadly, the buildings and industrial sectors are places where there are real opportunities to make progress on this because the roofs are so big, or parking garages, parking lots. I mean, those are places where you see huge solar panels in my hometown in Tucson. I think there's tremendous potential here, so I would consider it, for the same reasons that I talked about on the small scale for our home. I think apply, a broader scale too, because some of the buildings, large buildings and facilities have so much space on the roof, and they also have really high power bills. So I would encourage folks to think about that if they're in a position to make a decision about their companies or larger real estate or government holdings.
Yeah, to be able to check that out. So Park Hillers, we have just a couple more minutes. I think I've gotten all the questions that you have offered so far, but if any of you have any additional questions, please put them in the YouTube chat box or in the comment section on Facebook. Again, as you can see, I have my cell phone here, so if you have my cell, feel free to text me. Is there anything, as folks are doing that, if they have any final questions, any other pieces of info you want us to know, or any other encouragements that you might offer to folks that are listening and watching today?
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the invitation here, and I appreciate the interest already, and it's just been such a gift to join you here this morning. I would say, obviously the people who are here are motivated by social justice, by ethical considerations around how we treat our neighbors, how we treat creation, how we treat the creation that God gave us, and so it's like what you said earlier, and I thought that your sermon was so relevant. I think about how to put those values to work, faith in action, in a way that really resonates with you. Maybe you love the outdoors, and that's where you find your spiritual truth, or or a number of other things that you can find in the outdoors. Maybe you are fulfilled by working to protect your neighbors from environmental risks. Maybe both. But think about the small and large ways that you can put that faith, those values, into action.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Tori, who you got to see today, asks the question, do you have a favorite Earth Day event? Do you have a favorite Earth Day event?
Gee.
Maybe one of those places to put your values into practice like you're talking about.
Yeah.
Your face has lit up, by the way. I don't know if you can see it everywhere, but she's got this huge smile, her eyes got this glow. Yeah, what are you thinking about?
Well, so Earth Day is obviously in the spring, and it's a time when birds are migrating from south to north. So right around Earth Day, I get out my little Audubon app on my phone, and I start looking for birds. And we have some really wonderful spaces from the Arsenal just north of the soccer stadium, where we saw some great horned owls and owl babies a couple of weeks ago. And there are lakes in the foothills. I go up to Belmar Park, where I've seen wood ducks, which if you don't know what a wood duck is, you got to look it up, because it looks like something that some kid has colored in a coloring book using every color in the box. So that's what I do on Earth Day, and like I said, we're going to go to this bird banding event next week. So
very cool.
yeah.
It reminded me of a very good friend who lives in Tallahassee, Florida, and he drives down to the lower down on the Panhandle and does a bird count every year, and he's super excited about it. So shout out to my friend Gary. So I think we have one more question, and it's a big question. I'm trying to think the best way to frame it. But maybe I just ask it and hope that you can do with it what you want. But what role does the increasing human population have in all of this? And I don't even know how to properly to ask that. How do we address that? How do we become aware of that? What do you want to say about that? That's a huge question that's been asked.
Yeah, that is a huge question. And, there's some hard issues around resources and the finite character of resources. But at the same time, there's also so much abundance in the world and so much inequity. And so, I used to think a lot about population, still do, but I think more about inequity now. And
more about what, I'm sorry?
Inequity now,
absolutely, yeah.
And the inequitable distribution of resources, and the few who have so much, and the many who don't have enough. And so that's kind of where I focus a lot of my thinking and concern right now. A huge amount of concern for that. I worry about the future of this country when we have so many in need, and the resources aren't flowing to them, whether it's education, healthcare, the things that kind of can contribute to a more leveling out of resources and opportunity. I think we need to spread the wealth a little bit more, a little more equity, and I think that could solve some of those problems. Sometimes, I don't like to get into issues around how many kids people should have, because it's a deeply personal issue, right? But if you give people the resources and the education and the health care to make their own choices, I think people will tend to make the choices that give their families the best opportunities to succeed.
Absolutely. Amen.
So that's where I come out of.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds very similar throughout this past summer. We were using a book called Manna and Mercy, which helps us to go through the whole Bible. And the very basic premise of that book is that there is an abundance of manna, meaning stuff, manna, food, right, in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, but also abundant mercy, of God's mercy. And we so oftentimes operate from a place of scarcity. We talk about that a lot here at Park Hill, that we don't want to operate from a place of scarcity as if there's only a certain amount of stuff, whatever it is, to go around. And we know some things are finite, absolutely. But we put our faith right into action, as you were saying, by saying, no, we believe in a God of abundance. Not abundance like everybody gets a car, right? No, abundance that everybody gets, there's enough to go. There's enough to go around of what we need. And that when we hoard stuff, and it's almost like a comic book, this book, and it says when we hoard stuff or when we hoard manna, it piles up. You can't use it all. It changes itself and it begins to rot, but also changes us and how we approach it in a negative way. And so, that idea of there's abundant stuff. We got a distribution problem for sure. We oftentimes talk about it that way as well. And what I always say, I can picture one of my running buddies and we say this all the time, like at a certain point, enough is enough, right? Don't we have enough? When there are so many people that don't have enough. Easy to sit here and say that, I realize, and certainly folks could look at probably both of our lives and say, come on, Heidi, come on, Pastor Nathan, y'all have enough, can't you give a little more? And I get that, but I think that is the challenge for all of us, right? What are the choices we can make, as you've shared with us today? What are the better choices? What are the things we can not partake in? What are the things we can advocate for? I love the idea of, hey, find one thing that gives you passion or gets you fired up. You don't got to care about all of these different things. Maybe you should be concerned about it, but you don't have to do something about all of it. You can't, right? And you've shared that about earth justice. But what do you care about? What can you do? We'll give you the final word, Heidi. Anything else you want to share with us today or encourage us in any way?
Well, this has been such a great conversation, really deep, enriching. I've really enjoyed it, and I've appreciated the opportunity to share with you and to hear from you. And I just want to say thanks for this opportunity. It's been a great way to spend a Sunday morning.
Yeah, we appreciate you making the time today and taking the time to be with us. Again, Park Hillers, you can find out more information about Earth Justice at earthjustice.org. You'll find Heidi's email on there if you want to contact her and get in touch with her. She can give you some of those other organizations that she's lifted up and other ways that you can today, not tomorrow or the next day, but how you can continue to care for creation around us that God has entrusted to us. Would you show your appreciation if you have the ability in the chat box on YouTube or in the comment section or in the comment section on Facebook as well to thank her for her time, for the wisdom that she has shared with us. Thank you, Heidi, for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.
Have a good day, Park Hillers.